The disinflationary process, the process of getting inflation down, has begun, and it's begun in the goods sector, which is about a quarter of our economy. But it has a long way to go. These are the very early stages of disinflation. So the services sector, really, except for housing services, is not really showing any disinflation yet. So our message really was this process is likely to take quite a bit of time. It's not going to be, we don't think, smooth. It's probably going to be bumpy. And so we think that we're going to need to do further rate increases, as we said, and we think that we'll need to hold policy at a restrictive level for a period of time. Then comes the labor market report for January. It's very strong. It's certainly stronger than anyone I know expected. And so, but I would say, we didn't expect it to be this strong, but I would say it kind of shows you why we think that this will be a process that takes a significant period of time. The labor market's extraordinarily strong. It's a good thing that inflation has started to come down without the cost of a strong labor market. So financial conditions have tightened significantly since then. Sometimes we get data just the night before, but not on all pieces of data. It's a very small amount of data. For example, if we were going to get a big piece of data in the middle of an FOMC meeting, it will help me to know it the night before. Ongoing rate increases will be appropriate. And the reason is we're trying to achieve a stance of policy that is sufficiently restrictive to bring inflation down to 2% over time. And we don't think we've achieved that yet. So we said that. Now you see the labor market report, and I think, again, financial conditions are more well aligned with that than they were before. All of these numbers that we're throwing around here are conditional on incoming data and what happens. So we never say this is what we think will happen. We make a tentative forecast and then we let the data come in. For example, if the data were to continue to come in stronger than we expect, and we were to conclude that we needed to raise rates more than is priced into the markets or than we wrote down at our last group of forecasts in December, then we would certainly do that. We would certainly raise rates more.
Okay, so today, for people who aren't familiar with the FOMC, who actually is on the FOMC?
The U.S. Central Bank consists of a board of governors here in Washington. There are 7 governors. Those governors are nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate, and we serve terms that are not synced up with the election cycle, so we're independent. There are also 12 reserve banks around the country which have a degree of independence. Each reserve bank is led by a president who works there full-time. All 12 of them sit on the FOMC, so that's 19 people sit on the FOMC, so it's quite a large committee, of which 12 vote in any given year. The Reserve Bank presidents vote on a rotating basis, except New York, which votes every year. The FOMC meeting process takes more than a full week. I'm talking to all of the participants, all the 18 other ones. Staff has sent around memos, and there's something called the Teal Book, which is the staff's assessment of the economy and international economy and monetary policy and all that. Then we have an extensive discussion on the morning of the first day about the economy. Everybody talks about that. On the second day, we talk about monetary policy, and then we vote on monetary policy at around noon on the second day. Different chairs have done it different ways, and so I've tended to do what my immediate predecessor did, I think. Well, this is what I do. I speak last on the sort of the economic go-around. So everyone else talks about what they think about the economy and in their district, for example, if they're a Reserve Bank president. And I listen to all that, and then I give my comments at the end, and I kind of sum up what people have said. And then I speak first on monetary policy. So 2% is the global standard, and that is our objective, 2% as measured by the PCE index. That's not something we're looking at changing. That isn't going to change. We say that using our tools to get there over time, if you look at our forecasts, we expect 2023 to be a year of significant declines in inflation, and it's actually our job to make sure that that's the case. But I would tell you that with inflation headline, PCE inflation is running about 5%, core is running at 4.4. My guess is it will take certainly into not just this year, but next year to get down close to 2%. The labor market is strong because the economy is strong. And as I mentioned, it's a good thing that we've been able to see the beginnings of disinflation without seeing the labor market weaken. It's just that there's a lot of demand for workers. In fact, if you look at the supply of workers versus demand for workers, demand for U.S. workers is now more than 5 million greater than the available supply. And the available supply consists of people who are either working or actively looking for a job. This was not the case before the pandemic. The pandemic left a lasting mark so far on labor supply in the United States. The labor participation rate came down, and there now is a shortage of workers. It almost feels more structural than cyclical. That's a significant issue. We have 2 goals that Congress has assigned us: maximum employment and price stability. Price stability, as we've agreed, is 2% inflation. Maximum employment means if you want a job, you can get one. So right now, the labor market is at least at maximum employment. By many would say it is out of balance with more demand than there is supply. So what we're trying to do is get inflation down. We're not targeting a different unemployment rate. We're trying to use our tools to get inflation to come down over time. So Congress took very strong measures and we took very strong measures. And you see where the economy is. You've got a very, very strong labor market, but you have high inflation. As I mentioned, we're at the beginning of getting that down. If you look around the world, though, at other countries, they're also experiencing high inflation, including countries that didn't do as much as we did, either from a fiscal or monetary standpoint. So that tells you, though, that a big part of this inflation is actually related to the pandemic itself, the shutdown and then the reopening. That's a big part of it. So what happens is, as Treasury securities on our balance sheet mature up to a cap, a monthly cap, the balance sheet shrinks in that amount. Same thing with mortgage-backed securities as they are prepaid. The balance sheet is shrinking. In terms of the target level of it, we haven't put a specific dollar number on it. The idea is we're in a regime of ample reserves. Reserves are basically deposits at the reserve banks. And when we get close to that level where we feel that reserves are ample, kind of where we were before the pandemic, then we'll slow down and we'll sort of test where we are. And it'll be a couple of years, we think, till we get to that level. The debt limit is really something for the fiscal authorities to deal with. The Fed, our only role in this is that we're the fiscal agent of the Treasury Department. We're not a policymaker on that. And I will just say this really can only end one way, and that is with Congress raising the debt ceiling in a timely fashion so that the U.S. can pay all of its bills when and as due. That's what has to happen. And if that doesn't happen, no one should think that the Fed has the ability to shield the financial markets or the economy from the consequences of moving too slow. We're just at the beginning of this process, right? Goods inflation. So we need that process to continue. The whole inflation began with people not being able to buy services, instead buying goods, and then global supply chains collapsing. And so you couldn't get goods and prices of goods went up, and that's where it started. But that is now starting to get better as supply chains are improving and as people rotate purchases back to services. You move on, though. We're not seeing it yet in housing services, which is either rent or the ownership, the imputed costs of house ownership. But we expect to see that. So we need that to happen. That's another big part of the economy. It's got to come. It should come in the second half of this year. Then the biggest piece of it, and what I worry about the most, is when are we going to see disinflation or declining inflation in core services ex housing? So that's what I worry about. The last thing I worry about, just another exogenous event. It's a risky world out there, with the war in Ukraine and the reopening of China, and those are things that can affect our economy and the path of inflation. Most analysts, most economists would say that to get inflation down from high levels that we've had, if you look at history, there is some softening in labor market conditions that goes along with that. And that is still very possible and indeed likely here, some softening in labor market conditions. However, this cycle is different from other cycles because of where it came from, and it's just confounded all sorts of attempts to predict what it would do. So it is good that we have seen a very strong labor market, but at the same time we're seeing wages moderating. Wage increases are still very high, but wage increases have come down to a level still well above what would be sustainable with 2% inflation. And same thing with inflation. Inflation is starting to come down and the labor market hasn't softened. We do expect that it will soften, but we'll do what it will do. Our job is to get inflation down to 2% and preserve maximum employment. So we expect significant progress on inflation this year, and again, it's our job to produce it. And I want to say again, we throw these numbers around, but the reality is we're going to react to the data. So if we continue to get, for example, strong labor market reports or higher inflation reports, it may well be the case that we have to do more and raise hikes more than is priced in. We have a significant road ahead to get inflation down to 2%. And I think there's been an expectation that it'll go away quickly and painlessly, and I don't think that's at all guaranteed. That's not the base case. The base case is for me, is that it will take some time, and we'll have to do more rate increases, and then we'll have to look around and see whether we've done enough. We went through this long period where inflation was really anchored around 2%. And we think that, and economists think that, that's because people start to expect 2% inflation. And if everyone expects that prices are going to go up, prices and wages are going to go up 2% per year, then it will. That's what will happen. Having price stability, real price stability for an extended period of time is just enormously beneficial to the public, because you can then, on the back of that, you can build a very strong labor market, as we had. We had a labor market with really 3.5% unemployment in 2008 18 and 19. And we had inflation running barely getting to 2%, wages moving up the most for people at the lower end of the spectrum. We all want to get back to that place, but the bedrock of the whole thing is to get inflation under control.